Wesley Dodds is a character that had frequently been overshadowed by Neil Gaiman's dream. With both of their comics sharing the same name, the Sandman. The only comics I've personally read and remembered him being mentioned in before were the aforementioned Gaiman, Sandman, Night Terrors, and Kingdom Come.
Coughing baby! Begin!
Although he technically existed between the 40s and 90s, he was more of an afterthought than anything. He had less of a screen presence than Jubilee did in the live-action X-Men movies. This is because, during the golden age of comics, there were just way too many superheroes to keep track of, so only the top earners could really stay afloat. It was only because of Gaiman's allusions to the character that Wesley Dodds started getting a lot of interest during the 1980s to the 1990s. This eventually led to the release of Sandman Mystery Theater, a more film noir interpretation of the character, meant to draw in the mature audience that the Sandman and the Vertigo label as a whole catered to. It wouldn't be until 2023, during the dawn of DC's new Golden Age initiative, where the Sandman would get a 6-issue miniseries with him as the main character once again, alongside fellow JSA members like Alan Scott and Jay Garrick. Now that the Wikipedia summary is out of the way, let's get into the review. The most apparent thing from the issue covers alone is how amazing the art for the series is. I far prefer trade paperbacks due to how much more economical they are, but the floppy art literally gives me a run for my money, it looks that good. The art is courtesy of Riley Rossimo, who did a fantastic job on the 2019 Martian Manhunter run, and is most well known for The Batman Who Makes Money.
Here it is. There's the magic moment. Yes, that's it.
Only 10 spins.
Play Golden Eagle today to earn 10x free spins in order to win the gazillion-dollar jackpot. Download now.
Though I'll stand by the fact that the majority of the pages are worth your dime, some of his tendencies from Martian Manhunter carried over for the worst. His backgrounds are always phenomenal, and I don't know how much input he has in the panel layouts, but they are structured absolutely immaculately. The panels containing Wesley are rigid and digestible, with jagged and unlevel panels showing off the more violent aspects of his persona, making it look like he's shaking the page with his punches. Rossimo also does this thing where he draws panels inside of shots to show the passage of time, which I think is absolutely brilliant. However, sometimes the way he draws faces is inarguably ugly. I get the stylistic choice, but I'm more of a fan of it when it's used in a series that can benefit, like Martian Manhunter, where humans look weird and wonky from an alien perspective, as well as the fact that John Jones himself is a shapeshifter. But it's rather off-putting in a more down-to-earth series. The facial expressions do work very well in the fight scenes, especially when considering that Sandman has nightmare gas. But during serious conversations, it can be a bit off-putting. Some characters will have solid facial expressions on one page and super unappealing ones the next. It's like watching polygons pop in Mario 64. As stated earlier, the backgrounds look amazing, with Ben-Day dots and crosshatch lines for shading to emphasize the Golden Age, showing a more optimistic return to the character, as opposed to his grittier incarnation by Vertigo. But an aspect that I think Rossimo does better than 99% of the comic book industry is onomatopoeia. The size, color, and shape of the letters give a feel like no other comics out on the market today. I especially love this panel of the fire truck, giving a sense of motion and distance.
Mr. Shadman, draw me a chick. Boom, 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 make her a cutie and slap on a dick.
The first issue follows the titular Wesley Dodds, a vigilante who interrogates people with his sleeping gun, which causes people to have nightmares so horrific they confess anything when asked. The victim of tonight is a heavy hitter in organized crime, who rats out on all the leaders of the criminal underground in Manhattan. The first 6 pages in particular effectively establish the Sandman persona. The Sandman is a crime fighter who's made formidable by his gas, which neutralizes anyone instantly, and his rope gun, which makes him extremely mobile. He gets guidance from prophetic visions, which show him what mankind is capable of, both horrors and heroism. The last panel of page 6 sets up that he's embarking on an endeavor to not just beat criminals, but also support heroes. To follow that up, we have 2 scenes, one where he interacts with his servant, Humphreys, and his love interest, Diane Belmont, showing both of them as supportive figures who help calm his nerves before a big meeting. Humphreys is shown supporting Wesley as a listener and servant, where Diane is shown supporting Sandman to fight crime, as well as playing a more active role in helping Wesley think straight, bringing him down to earth. We learn that his apprehensiveness is due to an upcoming meeting to strike a military deal for his sleeping gas in hopes of ending World War II with less casualties, but he's rejected due to the fact that such a weapon would not be economically viable. With the Colonel he's bargaining with, explaining that keeping prisoners of war on such a massive scale is going to cost more than it's worth. More men from America would have to be ripped away from their mothers and wives in order to support the effort, and more food has to be shipped over in order to sustain the POWs. It displays Wesley's willingness to use his gifts to help others he doesn't even know, through means other than vigilantism. It also implies that his visions show him way too much of what goes on in trenches, explaining his sympathy for the opposing side. Wheeler, the person who arranged this military meeting, feels bad since he fought along Wesley's father in the trenches during the First World War, so he invites him and Diane to a party. But Wesley is understandably upset because he feels like his pursuit of a better world as a normal person is fruitless, causing him to leave the party early and be Sandman, just so he can feel like his work wasn't completely useless. But just as he's finished fighting the bad guys, he sees firefighters speeding towards his burning estate given to him by his late father. Issue 2 expands on this, revealing that somebody has stolen his Sandman equipment and framed a charred corpse, giving our detective a case to solve. I don't want to spoil more about the series without a spoiler warning, since it's only 6 issues long with a $17 paperback and good old reliable piracy. A short and simple review of this comic is that it's awesome, with a good amount of action and pure heart straight from the Golden Age. The character dynamic of Wesley and Diane can be explored a bit more, but it's interesting enough considering it's a reboot of a niche character. As cool as the detective work was, the genuine shock and mystery was rather lacking, but the way the villains challenge the characters' morals is extremely compelling, especially considering today's climate. Without getting into specifics, unlike other Golden Age throwback comics, this one has the protagonist go through a change after having been shown the flaws with their brand of morality. If you're looking for a classic story where the good guy beats the bad guys and makes out with the woman of his dreams, then this is for you. For the downsides, the story ends with what's basically an advertisement for the JSA, but it left me wanting more of Wesley Dodds on a solo adventure. In spite of this, DC has shown no intent on continuing the series, leaving me to read Mystery Theater via piracy since there's only one part of the compendium out so far, and I'm too embittered to believe that DC would complete it. This is the biggest drawback for me because, in my opinion, the worst feeling you can get when starting a character that's new to you is having a lack of available and consistent content centering around that character. That wraps up about everything spoiler-free. So, if you don't care about spoilers, here's a simple rundown. Wesley finds out that the body in his house was framed, but the law is only writing it off as a normal break-in gone wrong. The real arsonist stole his journal and Sandman equipment. The journal is the most important part here, since it contains recipes for lethal prototypes of the sleeper gas that Wesley deemed failures. It could be considered a contrivance, but possible reasons as to why he'd keep the journal is so that he wouldn't recreate the gases if he were to tweak the recipe. Moreover, it represents the amount he had to persevere to achieve success, the weight of what his knowledge can allow him to achieve, and the pressure to kill with no remorse. The military is a really good foil to Sandman due to the pragmatism. Wheeler already set up Wesley to go away from home, so he isn't putting any civilians at risk, only a dishonorably discharged criminal who he frames with arson. He saw how draining the brutality of war was on Wesley's dad, and is desperate to mitigate that suffering. The Colonel is thinking about a post-Depression America and how important it is that we don't get in deeper debt than necessary. It's fantastic because it talks about mass destruction in a heated time of war where everybody's wanting to drone strike everyone who's not them. Instead of talking about temporary solutions to contemporary political problems at hand, it throws caution to the wind in favor of a hero who can overcome all of these turmoils, giving readers a model for who they can be. People who aren't afraid of their worst nightmares and can't be dragged down by a few failures. The burglar who becomes the Fog is an equal wit and superior fighter to Sandman, but he's willing to use lethal gases. This forces Wesley into a corner, making him inhale his own gas and have nightmares, causing him to realize that the nightmares make the victims feel an immense amount of guilt for every transgression they made against their fellow man. Wesley decides to rise above this by using his gas less frequently than he otherwise would, since it's almost as traumatizing as his visions of being melted in the trenches. The only thing that I think could have been explored a bit more is how criminals view him. Chances are he's gotten a bit too brutal on criminals at points, and it would have been interesting to see a dramatized version of that in his nightmares. But for a 6-issue miniseries, the stark contrast of Dodds mind-raping somebody with a weed bukkake without sparingly he uses it after issue 4 is sufficient enough development. Wesley's character arc ends with him realizing that he can be way more humane than he had been in the past. But instead of just ending the comic right there on a nice little tagline, Wesley doubles down on his morality and does tangible things to improve himself, like making the sleeping gas not produce nightmares, which forces him to use more conventional interrogation tactics. The only downside in terms of how morality is portrayed is how the comic handles both Sandman and Diane killing people. Structurally, I love the fact that Diane's gun is set up throughout multiple issues, with her even pointing it in Wheeler's room as dramatic irony. But what should have been set up for 2 individual scenes where both characters can comfort each other turns out to be something that's relegated to only 3 panels where Diane looks like she's at her golden age. I understand that this is likely due to constraints of length in the comic, but I feel like it's the weakest area of writing worth pointing out, especially due to how big of a draw their relationship was for the series. I'm currently in the process of reading Mystery Theater, so this is my first solo introduction to the character, and as an outsider, it seems like the Nightmare thing was his whole entire gimmick, meaning that any solo series taking place after this would come off as less cool or too generic. When taking into account all the things that Rosimo can do with his art, and knowing that it won't be used on Nightmare segments. The only thing writers can really do is turn back time to reboot Mystery Theater, but I'm completely fine with that. I think that a power couple like Diane and Wesley would be a great addition to the Dawn of DC's runs, bringing the inspiring wholesomeness and action of the Golden Age to our modern day.